What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York, calling from the quarantine zone again. And this time we are here with Aaron of Gemini Syndrome. Thank you so much for being here today, man. It's great to have you here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so awesome to have you here. I'm so glad. I got to tell you, while 2020 was a shitty year for everybody, it's great for to get some new Gemini Syndrome at this time. We got three new singles that you release: Reintegration, IDK, and Die With Me. Is this maybe a good representation of maybe what a full length follow up to Memento Mori would be in a way?
Mm, kind of not, to be honest with you. Um, I think it definitely represents a part of what this new record sounds like, but there's some interesting surprises on it. There's some stuff that's a lot heavier than what's been released so far, and there's some stuff that's a lot on the other end of it, a lot more emotional strings tugging kind of stuff. So we kind of ran the gamut. Further off the spectrum than Say Goodnight in a sense from the last record, and then heavier than I guess Pleasure and Pain or Eternity or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I always thought like when I first heard Lux back in 2013 that like Gemini Syndrome's music is fairly experimental. Like I remember, going from a song like Stardust to a song like Pleasure and Pain to a song like Basement. It almost seemed like there was a lot of different elements you would like to incorporate. So it almost seems like trying new things is almost part of the Gemini Syndrome songwriting process in general, right?
In that regard, I would agree with you 100%. 100%.
Does it ever start off with a preconceived idea of what you and the band like want it to sound like, or is there like a lot of rolling the dice, a lot of improvising involved?
I'd say we discuss it ahead of time, um, to some extent, right? Like we approach each song like there's an agenda of like, do we want this to be heavy? If it's going to be a heavy tune, do we want it to be like super heavy, or are we trying to make this a little more melodic, or it might come out of just a riff that somebody brings, right? Um, there's a tune on this record that started out a lot more kind of experimental in one direction, where it was like these really grungy guitars and whatnot. And by the end of the finished product, when we got in the studio with Matt, it kind of went the opposite direction, and we incorporated some pianos and some really proggy sounding guitars and stuff. And uh, the song just had a different feel to it. It felt like a different tune than the one we had begun with. And I think the cool part about that is that some of the stuff that got removed from that tune could end up coming back later as another song, right, in a future album or something like that. So sometimes when you cut away the waste, so to say, it's not exactly waste, it's just something that maybe wasn't good for that particular meal, and we'll use it in a different dish somewhere down the road. To use a cooking analogy, that's for Meigs, by the way. He loves the Food Network. So
Well, you also aren't you always worried like the song you leave out could be a B side one day and just be the biggest hit you guys ever had?
sure, sure, sure. Yeah, you never know, man. You never know what people are gonna really uh, gravitate to and really identify with. You have an idea, or you think you do, but
Yeah.
sometimes you get surprised.
Having like multiple usages of your voice too, because like you have again like songs that incorporate a lot of screams like Left of Me, I believe off of Lux, and then you have like a song like that I would say was pretty heavy, but on the last album Zealot, if I pronounce that correctly, where like it's predominantly melodic singing but there's heavy instrumentation. Does the instrumentation sometimes adjust to fit a different style of your voice in a way?
It can. I feel like a lot of what I do lately in the last couple of records, more consciously, I guess, than Lux. Not to say that it wasn't there as a thought, but it was to create a complement or a yin yang to the really, really heavy stuff. Is sometimes I would the more musically heavy it was, the more I would want to use a pretty melody or a catchy melody over the top that was singable, to complement that kind of heaviness, right? Um, but not all the time. Sometimes you just gotta go balls out, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's hilarious when like there's screaming over like, some of the most gentle instrumentation. There's a black metal band I listen to called Life Lover, and they're like just doing like the most raw, eerie screams over like subtle like jazz like keyboards. It's
You'll have to text that or email that to me. I want to check it out.
Yeah, the album Pulver is one of the most they make the guys in Mayhem look like posers. So, so
That's a theme from dude. I have a handful of interviews today, which is cool. It's the first time this has happened since a couple years ago when we were all still active and the world hadn't gone on quarantine yet.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I know I'm supposed to talk about at 5 o'clock is some of the questions were like, who's allowed to be metal, and like just this kind of. And I was thinking about questions like that. Like when I was a teenager, man, I was all into black metal and death metal, like really black metal though, like early Dimmu and Marduk and things like that. And I think one of my first records that I fell in love with was "My Arms Your Hearse" by Opeth,
Oh wow.
and yeah, I was 14 years old when I found that record, and it's still one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about like who's allowed to be metal. I'm like, well, certainly me,
Hmm.
you know.
Well,
Even though I have my lighter side of Sears, you know, the softer side of Sears, I guess. But
I do see a little Opeth in the Gemini Syndrome DNA actually, because I think that Gemini Syndrome is a band that can sort of like sing people to sleep and scare people to death at the same time, and there,
hell yeah,
and there's also many different vibes. Like I remember going from a song like Gravedigger, which is a very melancholy track off the last album, to a song like Alive Inside, which I already have that bookmark. When this pandemic's declared over, that's going to be the first song I play. But
nice.
but like it almost seems like every song is representative of a different emotion that you were particularly feeling, right?
Yeah, I'd say that's very accurate. And if it wasn't something that I was feeling necessarily at the time, it was something that I was thinking about or had observed in somebody else and found it relevant enough to write a song about it. I'd say the majority of the time, though, it's something that I went through and felt the need to express, either to share it with other people or just to get it out of me.
Mm. So you almost get this emotion from both internally and externally. There's elements of experience, but there's elements of observation as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think part of the trick of becoming self-aware, as you become more analytical of your own feelings and patterns, you naturally become more aware of that in other people.
Yeah, I think part of self development is being able to empathize or relate to other people.
Absolutely. I don't think empathy is a born in trait. I think it's something that can be trained and practiced.
Absolutely. As a vocalist, have you always needed to hear the music to come up with the lyrics, or do you sometimes have a concept in mind and maybe that could help influence the song itself?
So I'd say it's a 50-50. I feel like the natural tendency for me is to have the music first. But when we were in the process of writing Memento Mori, I remember specifically watching an interview with some guy on The Daily Show, and he was talking about his book that he had written, and the book was titled Zealot. And we were like, what is the actual definition of that? We looked it up. We're like, that's a cool concept. We should write a song about that. And it happened to be like we were in the process of writing that song musically, but we didn't know exactly where to draw the inspiration from, right? And then like the TV kind of prompted us with an interview from this religious guy who was writing a book, and um, so that was kind of taking it from the outside world, right?
Yeah.
It literally wasn't. I mean, I internalized it as I wrote the song, right? But that song was in. Since you brought that up too, that tune is kind of about the concept of crabs in a bucket, right? Like everybody's trying to get to the top of the bucket and see what freedom looks like.
Yeah. Well, I almost think that that song is very reminiscent to a lot of things that people are feeling now because in the wake of this quarantine and this isolation, a lot there are everybody's trying to find their purpose and what this
Yep.
last year I would consider to be in this wasted life. I've listened to the album to death, so I'm kind of able to recite the lyrics.
No kidding. Yeah, man. That's cool though to see how it kind of it still has relevance after the fact, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't know we're doing that when we create art, and it can happen, and it's a trippy, sometimes scary thing.
Well,
You
I
got to be careful. Be careful what you put into words, right? You have to be careful what you put into song.
Well, I always say that art is life, and once you bring it into the world, you're not. It's there's this famous saying when you put a song out, it immediately becomes theirs. But I do think that like
Hmm.
really when you create art, it's life, and when it's out there in the world, you're just its humble guide in a way. So people are
Yeah,
gonna interact with it differently, just like they interact with you differently, or they interact with another individual differently.
100%.
And
Absolutely.
for that inspiration, you kind of in a way just answered this, but like, do you think that like does inspiration sometimes strike when you least expect it, or to get that songwriting energy and to get that songwriting feel, you almost need to be in a certain place or have your own usual realm?
I think that the answer, I'm sure, comes differently from different people, right?
Yeah.
I don't really have like a ritual necessarily. Um, I pace a lot. I tend to do the same activity. If I'm really into writing lyrics for a song, I put it on repeat and I just kind of walk around, and I guess that's as ritualistic as I get into it. But I think it can come, like things from that interview where it's zealot, it's a book, and we're like, oh, let's look up that's a cool word, basically. Is it what does that mean really? Because we had the context or whatever. So sometimes it can be, the strike of lightning somewhere. Have you seen the movie Walk Hard
I've never seen it, but
with John C. Riley? So one of the repeating themes in that movie is that his wife and him will be arguing, and either he or she will say something, and he'll crack like, "That's a great song." She's like, "Don't you dare write another song about that right now while we're fighting." It cracks me up because sometimes those moments do happen where you're in a stressful situation, or just not in the context that you might expect inspiration to come from.
yeah, it strikes in the most inconvenient times too, I'd imagine, right?
Yeah, yeah, it sure does.
Yep.
I tend to have a lot of stuff like right as I'm falling asleep or in my dreams, and I'm very terrible about like cataloging that stuff. So a lot of seemingly, I feel like I've written hundreds of awesome songs or lyrics that are just gone because I passed out.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing. Like I remember like Bruce Dickinson. Everybody was so happy when Bruce Dickinson was flying that Iron Maiden plane. I was terrified because I hope he's not getting inspiration like as he's approaching the freaking tarmac or something like that. Like, you know,
Well, pain is a great teacher, and fear can be a great teacher and inspirator as well. So,
yeah, but if that if that fuselage goes hurtling towards the freaking
yeah,
tarmac, I think you're gonna have bigger problems than
that's for sure.
writing some sick riffs.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And do you like to leave your music open to interpretation? Because I feel like you do sort of like approach your music from both a very literal and metaphorical standpoint. Like I thought Gravedigger, there didn't need to be too much analyzing to know that this is like a song about real depression and either overcoming it or succumbing to it. But then like, pleasure and pain, I mean, I thought both vocally like the style how you have the way you fluctuate the vocal styles, it kind of has that contrast element behind it. And then so like do you almost feel that like maybe your lyrics can be open to interpretation, or do you try to engage the listener in a meaning as much as the music itself?
I try to create a yin yang as much as possible, right? So I try to have there be both elements brought to the table, especially on this record. I don't really want to talk about what my opinion is of each song. I'm more interested to hear it. It's so far on the internet. I've been able to do that. I'd rather hear what other people think it means, because these songs there's a lot of veiled symbolism and meaning from. I wrote very metaphorically on this record, um, in certain parts at least, and I want to see what other people think about it and see how whatever my intention is still out there and it's still in the songs, right? But it'll be interesting to see what form it takes on as people have been for sure asking me about the whole 23 thing, like the U plus me equals 23. And that's the line I've been wanting to use for probably 20 years in a song somewhere. And it has a lot of different meanings. And that's the fun part about it, by not telling anybody what my intention was. Like I can tell you that it might be from Taoism, the one created the two created the three, and the three created the 10,000 things, right? It might mean that,
There,
but
you,
it might not.
every song you've made is definitely a rabbit hole. I could tell you that much.
That's the goal, because that's where I'm at most of the time.
Yeah.
And those rabbit holes that I find really interesting usually make it into some sort of like, what is this, man? This is my process of discovering the universe and myself as much as it is anybody else's.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite bands of all time is Lacuna Coil, and
Oh yeah.
they have that famous song 119. I have no idea what the hell it means. Like, like, that song was never even that big until they got bigger off their other albums, and now everybody's
Right.
wondering what that means, and now it's like their code. It's on their website. I'm like, what the
Right.
hell is 119? I see people who like diehard Lacuna Coil bands who tattoo that on them. I'm like,
Or is it 11-9?
oh God, now you just made it more confusing for me. Thanks. You made me lose a lot more sleep. I was just it took me a couple years to finally be able to sleep on not figuring that out, and now you just
Yes.
all right.
My chaotic deed for the day is done.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'll get you back now because I have the most difficult question of the interview.
All right.
How do you know when a song is done?
It's never done. At some point, you just have to cut the cord off.
Yeah.
I think every musician, if given the option, would just continue writing and re-recording as things evolve. Because you take a song on tour, and so like at least from the vocalist perspective, right? I might find something that I could have, those little lick in the vocals that I could have done on the record that would have been way cooler, and I'll just sing it live that way from now on because I like it better and it's my song. I did it, so I can change it if I want to, you know.
Yeah.
But you don't ever get to go back and really redo that stuff. So in that sense, the way the song was recorded, that's how it lives in eternity or whatever, and how we play it live can be those evolutions.
Oh, that's a good point. Like, oh, playing live almost is like anything that you wish you could have done on a previous song, you could
Yeah,
do
and you
live.
get to let it kind of evolve and change. I thought from one of the my earlier memories is from 101 Proof Live, the Pantera live record, when they're doing Cemetery Gates. And I was thinking at the time, I was like, Phil certainly can't sing, like he did on Cowboys from Hell. He's lost that falsetto between screaming every night for years and drinking and smoking and all that. Like you just lose that part of your voice. Like how are they going to do that ending with the dive bombs and everything? And they bust into like some kind of crazy and he just screams over it. It's heavy and it's like a finality to the song that the record didn't really have, and that was cool. That's one of those first moments I realized like you can change your stuff later.
Yeah, one of my favorites. I mean, I prefer to listen to this song live, but and thankfully they have the MTV version on the album. But Alice in Chains, when they did their MTV acoustic
Dude,
sing, and the way
yeah,
that he sort of like changed the melodies in wood and even kind of added
yeah,
different harmonies and down in a hole, it really does have like a different vibe and falsetto behind it, and I always love
yeah.
those changes.
Yep, the unplugged records from back in the day, man. The Alice in Chains, the Nirvana one was really influential to me as a 12-year-old, 11-year-old kid playing guitar. It was
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. Everybody picked up an acoustic guitar after that.
We tend to do that after the shows. We offer our VIP whatever thing is uh usually an acoustic-ish performance, and it's the songs turned into um those kind of tunes. We do Stardust and Morning Star just with acoustics and piano.
Morning Star, that's a pretty heavy song. How do you make that acoustic?
We make it really pretty. You can look up Gemini Syndrome acoustic on YouTube. You'll find a bunch of stuff.
I'll check it out. And
Okay.
I have two more questions for you.
Sure.
But I've yet to see Gemini Syndrome live, and I really hope that changes when tours do pick up again. And but like and we were talking about the live shows just now. Is there maybe a similar energy that you channel into the live presence as you do when you're songwriting or recording, or do you just consider them to be two completely separate arts altogether?
I think they have to be connected somehow because the music is a common denominator, right? So whatever vibe we're trying to create when we write the song is probably what's going to be conveyed when we play it live, right? But it's definitely a different context. Playing it live because it's just a different game than being in the studio. You know,
Yeah.
it's there and it's happening in the moment, and all these people are here with you doing the thing. So that always changes the energy of it. I always find it way easier to perform um, the songs that I do than maybe I do to record them. Sometimes there was parts on this record where we're doing vocals and Matt would ask me to sing a really high part and I'd be like, I don't know if I could do that, and he'd be like, well, just try. And I can't argue with that. So I would try and I would get it. And then I'd realize going back later when we started rehearsing that like with the energy of the adrenaline of like playing the show or having knowing people are in the room, you just get this adrenaline and these endorphins that make everything easier you know so you can kind of give a little more when you're playing live, I think.
Well, do you have to practice stage presence and like crowd interaction just as much as you like practice the song itself, or is that just something that develops naturally as you play more and more shows?
Both. It's something I had to plan ahead for, like, my in between song banter, as I call it. Because in the beginning, like, I wasn't, I played guitars in bands before this. I didn't want to be the front dude. And so that was a new place for me to be, and especially without a guitar behind me or in front of me. You know what I mean? I didn't have that thing to hide behind. So it was just me and the attention of the people. So like, what am I gonna say that's gonna matter? What am I gonna say that's gonna mean something, or at least correlate to the song that we're gonna play next, or the one that we just played? Um, I don't want to copy something that somebody else has done and said, because everybody's kind of got their thing, right? If you go see David Draymond, he's got a thing that he says, or a few things that he says. LJ has a few things that he says that just are become part of the performance, right? But I think you have to be conscious of those first before they, otherwise you just kind of sound like a bumbling idiot, which I've
Yeah,
certainly done before in my early days.
yeah.
It's like, what am I doing up here, you know?
Silence is worse than booze. That's what I've always said.
Unless used in the proper context when you're asking the audience to be silent, right?
Yeah,
And
fair
you're
enough.
trying to gain that. But yeah, if the song ends and nobody claps, that sucks.
Yeah, yeah. That's more painful than people going boo because at least you get a reaction.
What is awesome about some of it though, if you're playing a big crowd and they're really into it, then they'll just scream through your entire time to talk, and the next song will start. I didn't have to say anything,
Fair
so
enough.
that's acceptable too.
Yeah, exactly. And the final question I wanted to ask you is not only what I found unique about Gemini Syndrome's music, but I also really loved the visuals, like the music videos that you've put out in 2013, and like these visual aspects behind your album or artwork. I almost feel like I don't just hear Gemini Syndrome, but I also see Gemini Syndrome. That's how I'm able to kind of really
That's awesome.
sum up the band. Has this always been a vision that you had in mind on how you portray yourselves, or was this vision sort of coming to be as you were just writing more lyrics and creating more music?
I mean, I think both are true. Again, I think like everything is a little bit of yin yang, right? So we definitely saw this coming. We definitely had the intention of being a visual band as well, and it's taken on its own shape over the years. And as the songs have developed and the records came, um, it takes on its own life. Sometimes, like that life creating art or art creating life, we've pulled from things that we found in books later, or that we found in teachings that we were studying later, that were incorporated into our artwork that we weren't even aware of, but then we became aware of it down the road, right? So there's some stuff that's preconceived and that we knew we were going to use these symbols or whatever, and then there's like after the fact coming to an awareness of those things and what they really mean. So if it's a learning process as well as an unfoldment.
Yeah, it almost seems like with everything you create, there's just more things that open up and more.
Yeah,
It seems like you're learning about yourself as much as we're learning about you too.
that's 100% true.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time and for such a great conversation.
My
Um,
pleasure.
is there just anything else that you would like to promote? Like, if you're, this will be uploaded by midnight, so if it hasn't been announced yet, don't say it here. But like, is there just anything else you would like to promote? Like when we can maybe be getting a new full length Gemini Syndrome album, or anything else you'd like to plug?
We have tour dates for July and August. You can find those on any of our websites across socials, across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or the actual website. Uh, I know we're coming through the New York area and New Jersey and stuff. Um, so that is new. Yeah, the full length will be coming in the next handful of months.
Awesome.
I don't have a confirmed date, but it's looking by probably fallish.
Awesome. Great way to start off the new school year for young metalheads.
Yeah, man, that's right.
Awesome. But thank you so much, everybody. Aaron of
Thank you.
Gemini Syndrome. New stuff coming very soon. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.